folks, welcome back to another Besides and On podcast. We have, this will be the second last interview, I think.
Yes.
Of recording time at least.
Interesting that the two people left are the two people who are left, because we have the SNP today, and then we have abolished the Scottish Parliament Party next. So it's a fun contrast.
A fun wee contrast. We might talk about that. We'll see how it goes. So on the line right now we have Jenny Gilruth from the SNP. How are you doing, Jenny?
I'm doing well. Nice to speak to you both.
Awesome. So how do you feel about abolishing Holyrood and the Scottish Parliament?
I'd rather we didn't. I'm old enough to remember we didn't have a Scottish Parliament, so no, I'd rather we didn't. I think it's better we do, and democracy is closer to the people. So I don't think that's going to happen in this election somehow.
Fair enough.
Well,
you're entitled to your opinion, Jenny. We'll see how it goes. So basically, what we usually start off by asking is sort of like how your childhood was. So like, where did you grow up, Jenny?
So I was born in Aberdeen and grew up in the northeast of Scotland until I was about 8 or 9. My dad is from Fife originally, from Newport-on-Tay, and my family moved back to Fife in the early 90s and to Ceres. That's where I spent most of my childhood. So I went to Ceres Primary School and then to Majas and St Andrews. So yes, Fife is for me home, and I now represent, of course, Central Fife, Mid Fife and Glenrothes. So yes, it's an interesting childhood, I guess, in terms of growing up, but I think it probably shaped the way that I think about politics. I once actually randomly wrote to John Major when I was really young about low-flying aeroplanes in the northeast where we lived at the time. And I think I was fobbed off with a letter from Downing Street, and that probably sparked in me something that maybe continues to this day.
Because I think I can't remember who I spoke to on this podcast about like being young enough to remember like John Major, and like thinking that he was like this like sort of unattainable level of people like in the world sort of thing, like he was like the leader of the country sort of thing. And then I sort of started to care less and less as I found out that he was a Tory, like as I started to get a bit older. But it was sort of interesting having him there.
It's amazing how quickly your perspective changes on who these people are. But Ceres...
Yeah, I think politics is different as well. I mean, you know, back in the 80s when I was born, politics was distant. It was spoken about the Scottish Parliament. It didn't exist, and it was far away, and it was men in grey suits. So, yeah, a different time.
Yeah.
So, at the age that I am, I was born in 93, so the Scottish Parliament came into existence in 99, so I would have been 6 years old, so I can't remember that. What was the feeling within... I don't know what party you were in at that time, whether it was SNP or what, but what was the feeling like when eventually we got that Scottish Parliament?
So I'm not that old, but I was 14 when the Scottish Parliament opened or reopened in 99. So I was in third year, I think, at school when the campaign was happening, and I remember outside, as was then, in the 90s, Safeways, which is now Morrison's in St Andrews, and we used to go there every day for lunch when I was at school to go and get a roll, and I remember the big posters in the bus stop with the yes, yes vote. And I remember there was a real sense of excitement and optimism and doing kind of class elections and modern studies at school. And people stopped looking to London for guidance. And I think one of the things that's come out of the pandemic is that people now look very closely at what happens in Holyrood because they recognise that as the seat of political power in Scotland. So I think that has changed how people hold politicians to account, but also where we think power stems from. And there's a challenge there for all of us because, of course, we're not an independent country, not yet. And so, therefore, I think sometimes people look at the Scottish Parliament and consider that we do have the full powers an independent country might have. And I think that since 1999, there's been a real shift in terms of how people look to Edinburgh, look to the Scottish Parliament for answers to the problems that are in front of them. But yeah, in 99 there was huge optimism, huge excitement as well about this brand new Parliament. And I do remember going across to the Parliament. It was in the old buildings, which is in the old Church of Scotland buildings on the Mound before the new building opened, which was in 2004. So this must have been about late 99, and the MSP for North East Fife was a guy called Ian Smith. He was a Liberal Democrat MSP at the time, my constituency MSP when I was growing up. and I asked him about a question about women in politics, and I can't remember what he said. I guess he kind of fobbed me off because I was a 15-year-old asking questions about women in politics, and the Lib Dems haven't got a great record on women's representation in the Parliament. But yeah, there was a great feeling that we were closer at least to political power, and living in Fife, it felt like it was just over the water, and you could access it, you could reach it. We could go on a day trip from my school on the bus, and that was really exciting.
Did you ever do that day trip?
Yeah, well, that's the one I talked about when I was at school. So. Then as a modern studies teacher, I took kids across to the Parliament. So the last school I taught in was in Dunfermline, and took kids across on the bus again to Parliament. And it's really important, I think, that children growing up get to experience the Parliament building, and also they get an opportunity to speak to politicians and recognise that we're not, we're just normal people, Right. And I think as a woman in Kennedy actually the other night saying, "Oh, you're all the same," and I said, we're not all the same. And I had a bit of a conversation with her. And, I was a teacher before I was elected in 2016. It's not that long ago. And I think it's important that young people in particular recognise that normal people become politicians and that they can do it too.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of the podcast. We've spoken to everybody from Communist Party candidates to Tories, and I think we've had a UKIP guy on a couple of times as well. We've spoken to everybody across the spectrum, and they're all just people. And that's the whole point of the podcast, is some people are nice, some people aren't that nice, but they're people. They're going to have their own policies and ideas. Sometimes we disagree, sometimes we like them. And
normally some of the bad things you hear aren't actually as bad as people make it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So as we go through the podcast, we'll get to understand a bit more about that. Hopefully when people are listening, they can go through them a bit more. You have an interesting sort of background in the sense that you were actually a modern studies teacher. Now, were you... did you have a party you were part of at the time or anything like that? Like while you were doing that, I assumed you would have had to keep that out of the job a little bit.
Yeah. So I've been a member of the SNP since I was 22. So I joined in 2007, and that was just before I started teacher training. And I was always very precious about keeping my politics obviously private, and for a large part of my career that was really easy to do because social media wasn't as prevalent as it is now. Mm-hmm. But there came a time when my pupils could Google me and they would maybe find me in SNP photos. So if they asked, I would confirm it, but it's not something that would feature in the classroom. That being said, actually, because I had worked for an MSP, it wasn't so much party politics that I would talk to my classes about, but I would talk to them about how you run an election campaign and the types of things political parties do. And I could give examples of things that we had done as a political party in Central Fife. So I think that's quite important to draw on real life examples. And then again, in terms of the work, the role of an MSP, that's a big part of the modern studies syllabus, what an MSP or an MP does, how they hold surgeries, how they help constituents. So I could give examples of things that Tricia Marwick, who was my predecessor and who I had worked for, had done in the local area. And I think that was quite important for young people to be able to point to those examples, and also to recognise and understand that if and when they left school, there are opportunities for them to work in politics. But ultimately, the role of an MSP, most of my job, people see things maybe on TV or they see parliamentary speeches. That's not the biggest part of my job as an MSP. It's helping people in the local constituency, and I think it's important that folk understand that.
There you go. Awesome.
So I guess we'll speak a wee bit about the plans for the SNP and the Parliament. So I spoke about this briefly on the podcast. I think it was with the Greens. It was a very specific policy that had been released.
Oh, you're getting right into this straight away.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not a hard question. It's an interesting question. So my bugbear is the wording in manifestos and things like that. And understand that sometimes it's because some things just can't happen for whatever reason. Things can happen that stop other things from happening. But there was I think the specific policy was about renewing play parks in Scotland. Does that mean replacing things, or does that mean painting?
So I think the policy itself is focused on renewing and upgrading play parks, because we know that in the pandemic, a lot of young people have been at home and access to green space is really important. So the government, or the SNP rather, recognised that we need to do something about it. And I know in my local area that the play parks could do with some investment. We've had issues in Newcastle and Glenrothes recently with a play park being moved by the council, and those things don't often go down well in local communities. And I think it's really important that whatever you do at local level, you have the buy-in of the local people. You can't just come and foist something against them. So the commitment at the moment, as I understand it, is to renew and upgrade play park facilities. So to my mind, that wouldn't necessarily look like just painting, because that just sounds like a bit of a lick of paint. It looks like maybe modernising some of the equipment that's there. And we've seen some investment from some councils to modernise the equipment. And when I was wee, the play park had swings and a roundabout, and that was pretty much it. But the things that we now have in play parks are a bit more advanced than that. So I think there'll be a level of modernisation as well. I mean, I guess the challenge, what I would say for any government, irrespective of who wins the election, is that a lot of these pledges depend upon local authorities delivering them. So there is sometimes a challenge in that, and I would reflect on that as an MSP. I spend most of my days, as Fife Council will know, emailing them about different issues, and it is ultimately up to the local authority to deliver on a lot of these things at local level. And I think sometimes people forget that. For example, this is veering away, apologies, from play parks, but I had a guy tweeting at me the other day about the roads. I had to explain to him that, as an MSP, I'm not, in charge of the roads. That's for the council to upkeep. I can go to the council, I can make representations on his behalf, but ultimately, I think sometimes there is a bit of a disconnect from what people see maybe in parties' manifestos and their experiences, particularly the local council in the local area. And I think that that's something we need to improve.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I remember a lot of Kenemy community council meetings. David Alexander faces a lot of criticism for either things that he has no control over, or somebody will come in who's maybe wrong on an issue, and they'll say, but my MSP said this, and he'll just say, well, they couldn't have said that because that's not their area. And this back and forth where somebody doesn't really understand the situation they're in, that could be being improved, I would imagine. But I guess that comes back to modern studies, doesn't it? I mean, that's the kind of thing that you teach in modern studies.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. It's about political literacy, isn't it? And understanding who's got control of certain things. I mean, don't get me wrong. People complain to me about Fife Council. I will go to the council, and because I'm an MSP, they will try and get a quicker response for folks. So you do have power as an MSP to get things done, and that's a huge privilege that comes with the role. But sometimes, ultimately, matters are for the council, and it can be quite challenging, I think, for people to understand that. And also, as an MSP, I would reflect that it can be quite challenging for me that I can't just, get things done immediately, because that's not the way that our local government is organised at this moment in time.
Yeah, I guess that's the sort of argument between more localised democracy and more centralised democracy, about how quickly you get things done, but how fair is it that you're doing them? Yeah,
absolutely.
So what were some of the other main priorities? Try and hold back on the independence thing, we will leave that until the end. But what would some of the other priorities be in the SNP manifesto? I've not had a chance to read it yet. I know it came out, I think it was yesterday.
The only thing is we have it sitting right here.
Well, that's just the local leaflet.
That's a local leaflet, yeah. Jenny's face in the front of it right here.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Which one is it?
I think it's the one that went out with the Royal Mail.
The election address, yeah.
Yeah. The big
that
one.
will have gone out before. Yeah, so the interesting thing is that we're all putting together leaflets before the party's manifestos are out. So I don't think the election address has got any of the manifesto commitments in it, but it will be on some of the other literature we're putting out. So there was record investment announced yesterday for the NHS. We're going to increase the budget for the NHS, which I think is hugely important. There was an announcement around about free school meals for pupils in primary schools, which again we think is hugely important. There's also investment going into education, again, increasing the number of classroom teachers and classroom assistants, and building houses as well. So we're going to build 100,000 new homes, 70% of which will be available for social rent. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of all the other ones. Well, the Leave and Rail link is in there, so shout out for the constituency, which is hugely important. And the investment for Glenrothes Hospital is, again, when I spoke there about some of the investment for the NHS, that will be going to improving and upgrading the facilities in Glenrothes Hospital, which is really important. Glenrothes lost their out-of-hours service back in, I think, 2018 now. So there's a real need for that investment in Glenrothes, certainly at a local level, for health services. And I'm really glad the manifesto reflects that. I think it's really good news for the constituency.
Yeah, there has been quite a few. Sorry, on you go.
I seen Gavin Harrower, the guy for the Kenway pump track. He shared a thing about was it music tuition or something like that? There was something to do with music tuition.
That's right. Yeah, you know it better than me now. So we're going to take away.
That's all the one I know.
The fees associated with learning a musical instrument, which I think is important. We're also going to make sure there are no dentistry charges. Again, a big thing, I think, for a lot of folk who can't afford the dentistry charges. And around about, I guess, the cost of the school day, there's a lot of hidden costs. So we're taking away the charges that are associated perhaps with school trips. And, you know, I don't remember when you're at school, but home ec and subjects like that might require extra money to buy equipment, and we're taking away those charges as well. And the idea behind a lot of the policies essentially in education is to try and level the playing field, to try and make sure there are no barriers to learning for kids who can't afford things that shouldn't exist in the Scottish education system. We're also doubling the Scottish Child Payment, which will be £20 a week, which I think, again, is a real game changer. That's what charities have described it as, and that will go to those most in need. And I think the pandemic has shown us the gap between the rich and the poor has widened, but also it's exacerbated some of the inequalities which already existed in our society. So I see that coming into my inbox on a daily basis as an MSP. And the pandemic has made people's lives worse. And I think we in the SNP anyway spend a lot of our time talking about, and we're going to come on to talk about independence, but we are mitigating within the current constitutional arrangements against austerity. And that's hitting people, it's hurting them. And on top of that, we're trying to protect people. We spent, I think, over £100 million in 2019 on mitigating Tory austerity policies. I mean, that's not the job, in my view, of the Scottish Parliament. It's not the job of the Scottish Government or the SNP. We shouldn't have to do those things. We should be using that money to help folk. And instead, we're having to create a buffer to protect people from things like the bedroom tax and the rate clause. So it's really a transformative manifesto. It shows record investment in the country, but ultimately it's also been set, I suppose, in a context which is quite difficult politically, and we'll maybe come on to that later.
Yeah, it does seem there's a lot happening and a lot of manifestos, even like sort of sneak peeks of manifestos that haven't been released and stuff, that COVID has sort of forced everybody to become radical. And it's kind of a weird shift. And especially in schools, there's a lot of talk from multiple different parties of schools getting, or school-aged people getting access to things that they don't currently have access to for free. There's a lot of that going on. And I think it's a fair compensation for some of the issues kids have had to deal with this year. Like, there was also talk of giving laptops to pupils as well.
Oh, I forgot.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's a lot.
I think that's really important because... Yeah, sorry, on you go.
Sorry, I was just saying there was a lot.
Yeah, I think the laptops policy that we brought forward is really important. At the start of the pandemic, I had in Fife, the council's approach was to give a laptop almost per family. So I had parents getting in touch with me saying that one of their kids had a laptop and one didn't. I mean, that's not right. If the council had decided that, one of the kids should have access to a laptop, the other one needed it too. So there was, I think, an inequality. Again, we spoke about this at the start of the programme, but there sometimes is a challenge in terms of government policy getting out at local level. And sometimes that's about councils maybe misinterpreting it. Sometimes the councils might argue we don't have enough money to fund it. But ultimately, there's a policy now in place that every child should have access to a free laptop. And I was glad actually to see Fife Council had moved their position on that, I think a week before we announced the manifesto commitment. But it's not just about one laptop, it's about the training that goes with using that device. I mean, I think we're putting in place that training, which is really important, not just for the pupils, but for the teachers too. I mean, I've not been in a classroom since 2015, so I consider myself thoroughly de-skilled. But when I speak to my little sister, who's a physics teacher, the things that she does with her classes now, because all her lessons are online and they're all moving kind of online. It's completely out with my, experience of delivering lessons in front of a class, delivering a PowerPoint, or maybe doing a bit of group work. Like the teaching that was going on 6 or 7 years ago is dramatically different to what's had to happen in the last year. And teachers have really stepped up to the mark. And I think that they should be praised. And I'm really, really proud actually of the work that's going on at local level from our teachers to make sure that kids get access to the curriculum. And, we know that certain pupils were not accessing the curriculum because they didn't have laptops. So this policy is really important, I think, in terms of giving them that security of access to their education. One of the other things that was announced yesterday was that we're going to create a digital academy, and that will allow any people to study almost in an open university way for a higher or a National 5 qualification. All of that will be online. And, in the past, I remember being told by head teachers that I couldn't run an advanced higher class because I didn't have enough people to take it. And that was unfortunate. Those people didn't get the opportunity to learn that subject at an advanced higher level. So hopefully now we'll have an online digital academy which will allow young people to have the access to all subjects in the curriculum should they want to. And it'll end that postcode lottery of higher availability.
I love the idea that they switched from a laptop per household to per child. Because I don't know, Craig, if you remember years ago the many lumps and bruises caused by not getting a shot off the PlayStation.
Aye.
So, and again, that looks after kids' welfare as well in some way. A lot less bruises and lumps.
Also, just logically, you would assume
the parents are going to argue about stuff.
But also, they're going to need to use the laptop at the same time.
Aye.
It's not like schools are going to change times for classes because they've only got one laptop. Mm-hmm. So that didn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah.
But no, it didn't make sense to me either. But it's sorted now, so that's good.
So this is not so much a political question. This is sort of more of your opinion on a certain thing because you were a teacher. What is your view on online learning? Do you think it could be better for pupils, or do you think it's worse, or do you think it's just, at this point, it's just surviving?
So that's a really good question. I don't think online learning will ever be a full replacement for in-person learning. I think in-person learning is the best way to teach, but we needed to find a solution during the pandemic to replace that in-person learning. And so IT, laptops, they give us that opportunity to do things differently. But no, I don't think it's a permanent replacement. I think we need it as a backup right now. And, schools have just gone back to full-time learning, which is great. And 5 schools are now all back. Can I foresee a scenario in the future whereby we go back into some sort of mini lockdown? Unfortunately, yes, at this moment in time, none of us can rule that out. So we need to have this kind of backup. And certainly from speaking to colleagues who are still in the classroom or remote teaching as they were, they now feel that they have the knowledge and the expertise that they've built up over the last year anyway to do that. So I think that's really important. But, apologies if you can hear my dog barking in the background. But it's the job of the government, it's the job of local councils as well to support teaching staff to make sure they've got, the training they need in place to deliver online learning, and also to make sure they've got the kit. So that's why I think these laptops are hugely important for pupils. And certainly in my own experience of teaching not that long ago, we used to have to go to the library. And when I was at school, it was a thing to go to the library to get a shot on the computer. So things are so different now. If kids all have access. And then we could get from the English department when I was last teaching a shot of their iBooks that they had. But they only had 20 and they weren't internet connected. And the internet connection didn't stretch to my classroom. So they could sit and do typing, but that was essentially it. And we really need to have classrooms that are fit for the 21st century, and that's why I think this investment is really, really important for our young people. It's important for our teachers as well.
Yeah, I remember we interviewed an English teacher, I think it was last summer. I thought, it was because she was in the house, and it was at a time when
it was the summer before, was it not?
No, it was 2020.
Was it?
Yeah, it was definitely 2020, because we were talking about how it's illegal to
because we're already locked in for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah. So that was...
I forget the past year.
The times when you were allowed to see people, it was crazy. And she was complaining, I think she was complaining about the online learning has now killed any concept of a snowy day, like a day off just because it's snowing.
Aye.
Yeah. Well, indeed, the weather, a snow day, that used to be really exciting. Or if you got a wasp in your classroom, that was also one which would affect the learning.
The wasp thing
we
was...
do get learning, but yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely benefits to either.
Definitely.
So is there anything else, or should we move on to the independence thing? Yeah, I think you've got 45 minutes, so we've got you until 1:45, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so I guess we move on to independence. I have noticed the SNP are sort of getting it tight from both angles of the Yes movement. There's complaints of the SNP aren't being radical enough on independence, and on the Tory side, it's that the SNP won't shut up about independence, and that's the only thing they're focusing on. What is the accurate framing?
So I think what's accurate is that, we won an election in 2016 on a mandate that should Scotland be dragged out of the EU against our will, that would be grounds for a second independence referendum. So we've already won the argument. We have the mandate from the last election, you could argue. But then, of course, the pandemic hit, and that legislation for the referendum was already waiting to go. And when I was appointed as a minister last 2020, last February, one of the first things I got to do was meet with officials and talk about the work we were doing in independence. It was really exciting. And then, of course, the referendum came. And I suppose we really need to reflect on how the government responded to, the SNP in government responded to the emergence of the pandemic and what that meant for our political priorities. And what it meant was we stopped doing anything related to independence. It all gets paused, it was all stopped. I know this because it was it sat in the constitutional portfolio where I had some responsibilities, and therefore I know that all the civil servants stopped working on it. And I think it's important when the Tories trot out lines, and I heard Douglas Ross say this on the TV debate earlier this week. He said, you can't do it now, it's not responsible to have it in a pandemic. And I would agree with him. What we're arguing for is that when the pandemic is over, when it's safe to do so, we should have, Scotland should have an opportunity to have a say in our future. And contrast what we did around independence in the referendum and parking it essentially until after the pandemic is over with the UK government, who of course pushed ahead with the Brexit plan. Throughout the summer, throughout the peak of the crisis when, hundreds of thousands of people have died and they pushed ahead with it. And I think when you compare and contrast our approach as a government, we've been extremely responsible and we've been extremely cautious as well with regards to COVID restrictions. And some of what we've seen from the UK government undoubtedly has pushed more people in Scotland towards the SNP and also towards independence. And that's why you see poll after poll now suggesting support for independence is well over 50%. So something's happened, I think, in the psyche of the Scottish people through the pandemic, which is not only that actually the UK government aren't really that interested in Scotland and they're more interested in pushing ahead with their own kind of Brexit agenda, whatever that might look like, but also the leadership of the First Minister. And, we've been going around campaigning in the local constituency, and I have to tell you that people after people who I speak to in their gardens, obviously socially distanced with masks on, tell me they are now voting SNP because of Nicola Sturgeon. So I think that we shouldn't underestimate that her leadership throughout the pandemic, standing up day after day to do these TV conferences, has brought a lot of people to the independent side. And in terms of the timing of that referendum, of course, that's yet to be decided, but it has been suggested it will be in the early stages of the next parliamentary session. We need to see where we are with COVID, but I think it's really important people have a choice about Scotland's future. Do we want to stay part of this Brexiteer Britain, closing our borders, closing ourselves off from the world, isolationist, or do we want to be an independent nation back in the EU, trading with the rest of the world, internationalist in outlook? I think that's more where we are in Scotland. I think that's more aligned with the values of the people that I represent anyway. And now it's for, of course, the people to decide. We'll see what happens after the election in 3 weeks' time. But it's time for, the Tories, we've had enough of this. It's day after day, the games that they're playing, this is serious stuff. We're talking about people's livelihoods. And I spoke and touched upon what's been happening with regards to Brexit. Brexit's really hurting some local businesses in the constituency and across Fife. People can't export anymore. It's too expensive for them to do that. The red tape, the bureaucracy the UK government have foisted upon small businesses, and we have so many small businesses in Scotland, is breaking their back. So we need to cut them some slack and we need to help them. And one way in which we could do that is to give them some breathing space. And we believe ultimately that an independent Scotland would give them greater trading opportunities. So we'll wait and see what the people say in 3 weeks' time. But I think in terms of independence, the story's not over yet.
So partly because this meme became very big, and so I now just want to ask us the same question to see what you say. Why do you not think that you can work on independence and recovery from COVID at the same time?
Why do we not think? So in terms of where we were last year, you mean at the start of the pandemic, or?
Yeah, but I mean, why can't you work on COVID recovery and independence at the same time?
So we decided, well, what we would say is now that we need independence for recovery, because we need the full powers of an independent country to allow us to fully recover. We did pause the work on independence with regard to the legislation and also the work that was being done right behind the scenes in February of last year to allow our civil servants to work on helping to save lives. So, in government, my job was as Europe Minister, but also in international development. Lots and lots of civil servants who worked in my department were moved over to the COVID department. Suddenly you had civil servants from across government being pulled in to help organise vaccinations, organise places, social distancing, organise advertising that had to go around that, making sure there was enough PPE. You had armies of civil servants being involved in that work, and they were working through the night on some of this work because it was so important, and it was really important we moved quickly. We brought forward as well, I don't know if you remember last year, emergency legislation, which was really quite draconian, and the UK government did likewise, and we had to do that to save lives. So there was no question for us as a government that we could have civil servants continuing to work on independence matters, when at the end of the day, we needed to save people's lives, we needed to protect the population, protect the NHS. So that's what we chose to do, chose to prioritise. Having said that, now we are, I hope, through the worst of the pandemic. Before the Parliament went into recess, which is what we're in just now, we did bring forward the legislation for the independence referendum in the last week of the term. So that legislation is sitting there waiting for the next government, whoever that might be, to take it forward. And obviously, if it's an SNP government, we would intend to do that when it was safe to do so. But we did choose to prioritise saving people's lives because we thought that was the right thing to do. I'm really disappointed the UK government chose to push ahead with their Brexit plans and not focus on the population large. I think the UK government have made a number of mistakes in regard to their response to the COVID-19 crisis. But had they done that, they could have given Scottish businesses and UK businesses too a bit of breathing space. So what they could have done was they could have extended the transition period, which came to an end in December. That would have meant that all the changes that came into play on the 1st of January didn't hit businesses, and they could have created a bit of breathing space for them. These businesses, a lot of them have already been dealing with the pandemic and the impact that that's had on their trading, and many of them already have gone under. So we need to try and protect Scottish livelihoods here. And it's really unfortunate the UK government chose instead to prioritise Brexit at all costs.
What was very interesting to me is that the polls started changing for yes, and I think it was about June, maybe May, June of last year. Yeah. And that was around the time where the Scottish government made clear that they were sort of diverging from the same path as Boris Johnson, or they had already, and it was becoming clear that was actually going to happen. And which suggests to me that a lot of the move to yes happened because of a failure of Westminster government policies, which then, as you say, made very clear that Nicola Sturgeon was a better leader. And again, that's shown in our approval ratings as well. Yeah.
I think there were a number of flashpoints in the last year throughout the pandemic when we didn't move as quickly as England did. And, I'm not going to pretend that everybody who was emailing me thought that was a great idea, because I had businesses in my ear and the constituency saying this is ridiculous, we need to open up, we need to survive, pubs in particular really feeling the heat, hairdressers, lots of businesses that were non-essential and had to close. But I would say the vast majority of folk understood what this was about. And you're right, most people, if you speak to them even now, are quite cautious in Scotland, I would say, and certainly in the local area. They don't want us to massively reopen up the economy if it means we're going to have to go into another lockdown. We want to try and avoid that as much as we can. So what we've done as a government is be extremely cautious And the reason we've done that is ultimately to save lives. So now, there was a big push on to get the kids back to school, but we had to wait until it was safe enough to do so. And I know those decisions were taken really seriously, and we had to look at the evidence in front of us. But you're right, England opened up far quicker than we did. They went at a faster pace. And I think if you can compare, I don't want to compare the death toll numbers, for example, we get into that kind of conversation, but if you compare the responses of the government, I think we've taken a cautious and more responsible approach. And Boris Johnson's leadership has bluntly been lacking throughout the pandemic. I think he doesn't fare well under pressure. Of course, I'm going to say this because I work for her, but Nicola Sturgeon has led like no other politician throughout this pandemic. And whatever you might think about her politics, there's a level of respect for Nicola which now almost transcends that. You might have folk now saying, you know what, I might vote SNP. I'm not yet there on independence, but actually Nicola has done a shift for us, hasn't she, on the pandemic? And that's what people are telling me when I'm out and knocking on doors and within the constituency and the campaign at the moment. There's a real warmth towards her because of the work that she put in, and people recognise that.
Yeah, I mean, I speak to a lot of different people from a lot of different parties, and it's quite clear across the board that, again, they might not agree with our politics generally, but the way she's acted during COVID has been...
Okay, yeah.
In an unbiased way, because we don't pick sides here. It's been pretty fantastic.
And again, a lot of we've spoken to experts, we've spoken to epidemiologists, virologists and stuff, and for Nicola was going through a lot of annoying stuff at the beginning because even science was trying to catch up.
Yeah.
Through a lot of this pandemic. So again, Nicola's just going on second-hand information a lot of the time, and so she's done well.
Yeah. I think at the start of the pandemic, there were lots of things that we didn't yet know. We couldn't test, for example. Remember at the start of the pandemic for COVID, and even thinking back to March or February of last year, I was in London I think the first week of March on a workshop, and I was sitting at a conference, or I think with hundreds and hundreds of other people, and the idea now of being in a room with lots of people terrifies me. So I think we've learned a lot as a population about what this virus is about. We all take it now very seriously. Even the wearing of masks, remember at the start, that wasn't necessarily a given. So we've moved on our understanding, and I think we'll also be better prepared for any future pandemic. Unfortunately, should it hit, we will have the coping mechanisms. And it's not been easy for all of us, not least the young people. My sister had a baby in the middle of lockdown, so for those wee babies that haven't been socialised and haven't been able to see other family members, I'm sure that getting to meet up with 6 strangers from today might help with their own development, and certainly their parents.
Definitely.
I had a very embarrassing Facebook memory come up. It was I think it was April, so before masks and it became scientifically viable. Scientists were wear masks. Mm-hmm. So that's the only reason I justify this. But I went on a thing about how you just look like an idiot wearing a mask. Especially the cloth ones, because they didn't protect you. And now I look back, I'm like, okay, delete, get rid of that.
But it's funny though, because I think people have just moved on in terms of their understanding, and we now just all do it and we don't question it. Yeah. I remember at the start of the mask requirement, there was a bit of pushback, and I remember being in Asda in the town and some people not wearing it, and there was a kind of, a resistance around it. Of course, for some people, for medical reasons, they can't wear them, and I recognise that. But now the vast majority of folks do it, and just a matter of course, they don't need to be asked to do it either, because they want to protect themselves and other people should they have the virus. And I think the idea that, we still, in terms of the virus itself, the majority of people who have the virus can often not even have any symptoms. So it's something to bear in mind.
Okay. Excellent. Right, okay, so we're going to end on a final thing. That's my favourite part of the programme. Me specifically, I kind of hate that idea, when you go into radio programmes and kind of hustings and stuff, they usually ask you to, in 3 minutes, sort of
solve world hunger.
Solve world hunger and stuff like that. But I do like the idea of a sort of last minute thing. So what I'm going to get you to do next is in 2 minutes, tell the people why they should vote for you, and I'm going to get you to do it in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, well, you should vote for me in the next election because an SNP government is going to deliver the Leaving Mouth Rail Link. That's £70 million worth of investment, and £5 million is going towards active travel, which is being match funded by Fife Council, and that's really good for the local area. You should vote for me because we managed to secure investment for the A92 in the constituency. Again, a dangerous road within the constituency which travels alongside of Glenrothes. It's really important that investment happens, and it's underway right now. You should also vote for me because we need to do something about Glenrothes Town Centre. Now, I know the local council have come up with a town centre master plan. I'm really keen to support them on doing that, either through the town centre funding, which is available from an SNP Scottish Government, or the Scottish National Investment Bank. It's important we reclaim the town centre for the people of Glenrothes. You should also vote for me with regards to the investment the SNP is bringing in terms of the town centre fund to Leven. So £200,000 is being spent in the old WH Smith offices down in Leven, and those offices are on the High Street. They've been empty for a long time, and it's important we regenerate Leven High Street. That's hugely important. We've also brought investment to Colleydene under the SNP. So the Colleydene Community Centre secured £60,000 at the start of the pandemic, and they've been involved in delivering free laptops to people in the local community who don't have internet connectivity. But at the end of the day, you should vote for me as an MSP because my job is to help people. So if you have a problem, irrespective of your political views, I am here to listen. So you should consider about who you want in the local community to represent your views in Holyrood, but also at local level to the council or whatever other organisation. My job as an MSP is to look after my constituents, and I take that job extremely seriously. A re-elected SNP government is going to bring forward transformative changes, and after the pandemic is over, we will also give the people a right on their future as an independent country. And I hope that you will choose to vote for an SNP government by using both of your votes, one for me and one for the First Minister and the Fourth Person.
Oh, just over time there, but that was almost perfect.
There you go.
He's timed that pretty. That's so politician-y.
Have you done this before, Jenny?
No, I've not actually. I'm just trying to remember in my head.
That was perfect. Most people
Maybe not have to take a note. So
most people either rant on for ages.
Aye, just hoping
yeah.
the lasts 2 minutes and it's fine.
Yeah, and some people just like.
Well, do you know what? I always think it's better to have examples because otherwise people just think, politicians can, gift to the gab. That's what this job's about, people think. But it's not. It's about examples that people can point to. And if I know I'm doing my job, if I can point to things in the local community and we've delivered on them. So.
There you go. Well, Jenny, thanks for joining us. I think that's your 45 minutes.
Yep.
Perfectly done.
Thank you. Lovely to speak to you both. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Right, we'll let you go, Jenny. Thank you again.
Cheers. Okay, thanks. Cheerio.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye.